What is going on, gunfighters, savage gunfighters? We're going to talk about some Savage cartridges today. Cartridges by Savage. There are some interesting ones. Up to the 30 cals in the Savage. I think in the discussion of firearms Americana, we often look at Winchester and Remington, Colt, but Savage has a long and storied history and often ahead of their time. So let's look at some Savage cartridges today. We'll talk a little bit about their straight up facts, a little bit about what they were and still are good for. That is what we are going to talk about today on Gunfighter Life. Welcome to the podcast where we talk about guns, gunfighting, tactics, ballistics, the right way with Almighty God at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. Now a disclaimer here. I say real-world first-hand experience. I have real-world first-hand experience in military, law enforcement, hunting, guiding, competitive shooting. I don't have any first-hand experience with the Savage cartridges. I'm aware of them. I've never used them. I don't own any. You can look at their numbers from their ballistic characteristics and deduce certain things about them, but I just want to say that up front. I can talk about what they would and would not be good for. I can talk about some of the cool history, but I'm not the guy that's, hunted with my grandfather's Savage 99 and 300 Savage for 4 generations. That's just not me. I don't have that experience. So I don't want to misrepresent myself here. Instead of going oldest to newest, let's start with the smaller and go up to the larger. The 22 Savage High Power. I'll be getting some of these facts from Wikipedia. As again, I don't have a ton of experience with these. Take what Wikipedia says with a grain of salt, but they're usually pretty legit on their basic facts. Created by Charles Newton and introduced by Savage Arms in 1912. 1912. At least for the Americans, WW1. That was 14 to 17 for us. And was designed to be used in a Savage 99 hammerless lever action rifle. Now, I'm going to back up. I've just read a little bit, but two things are going to come up over and over again. We're talking about these cartridges. One is Charles Newton. Charles Newton was a big name in what we would call today influencer, designer, engineer of cartridges in the early 20th century. Obviously, I wasn't alive then, but we see this name coming up over and over again in the firearms world. If you dig deep enough in cartridges of the early 20th century, you'll see Charles Newton. Often on the bleeding edge of cartridge technology. And the Savage 99. The Savage 99, also on the bleeding edge, way ahead of its time. The 99, standing for 1899, came out at a time when people were still shooting black powder cartridges, and the majority still today of lever actions are a tube magazine, meaning you generally can't shoot Spitzer or pointed bullets through them. This one's way ahead of its time. This one let you shoot proper full-powered rifle cartridges and a fast, handy rifle. Some of them even take down a rotary magazine, which is pretty sweet. I think some may have had detachable box magazines. Some had a rotary, and some had a rotary with a counter. This gun was way ahead of its time. We'll see, it was very popular, and a lot of these cartridges will have been chambered in or designed for the Savage 99. Now getting back to the 22 Savage High Power. Based on the 22-35 Winchester cartridge. Bet you don't hear about a lot of Wildcats based on the 22-35 Winchester. And this is where it gets a little odd for today. Neck down to accept the 227 and 228 diameter bullets. Now, if you're not super familiar with ballistics nerdery, reloading, kind of the standard today for 22 center fires is .224 diameter bullets, like a 223, 220 Swift, 22-250. Those are .224 diameter bullets. This cartridge predates all those. there wasn't really a set standard, so they settled on a 22 caliber of .227, .228. Is that going to make a big difference ballistically? No, it's just interesting that this predates all those other 22 calibers. A high velocity 22 caliber in 1912. How fast? How high velocity? Its original loading was a 70 grain soft point bullet with a velocity of 2790 feet per second. That is impressive. Now, if we look at, for a long time, the standard in the 223-556 military loading was a 55 grain ball at around 3,200 feet a second. When they went to 62 grain in a rifle, generally around 3,000 feet a second. You get heavier than the 62 grain, you'll generally drop into the 20s. This is a 70 grain bullet at 2790. I would call this an intermediate cartridge, but I would say if you look at it ballistically, now a Savage 99 is not going to go toe to toe, so don't have any delusions of grandeur. Don't run into the apocalypse with your Savage 99, unless it's just all you have. But it's not going to keep up with an AR-15. Not going to keep up with a Mini 14. It's not a box magazine fed, shoulder fired, auto loading rifle, but pretty fast and handy for its time. And if you look at the cartridge ballistically, it's right up there with the 223. Now, looking at a picture of it, it looks nothing like a 223. It actually reminds me of, very similar to a 7.62x54R that got shrunk down. Kind of that high taper, which a lot of cartridges had back in the day, like 375 H&H, like the aforementioned 7.62x54R, because metallurgy and things like that weren't what they are today, and it helped in extraction. We even see this still in the 7.62x39. It's got a high body taper. Once that cartridge gets pulled back a little bit, it should break free of the chamber because it's got such a high taper. This cartridge has a similarly high taper, kind of a long shoulder, a long neck. Again, for the day, that is pretty standard. What was not standard was the velocity and kind of that concept of a high velocity 22 caliber of 70 grains in a light handy rifle or carbine. Very ahead of its time. Now let's look to the 25 caliber. The 250-3000 Savage. Now this one you may have heard of because the next thing I'm going to tell you is fairly well known amongst firearms historians. It was the first, I think, commercially available cartridge that at least advertised of a medium bore cartridge over 3,000 feet a second. The 250-3000 Savage. You may just hear it as the 250 Savage, but the 250-3000 Savage pushed a bullet of 25 caliber over or at or above 3,000 feet per second. And when was it doing this? Because that's pretty vanilla today. But what's vanilla today was, I don't know, the craziest flavor you could think of, back in the day. Rocky Road, Moose Tracks. 1915, I'm going to the wiki now, I didn't know that one by heart. 1915 was designed to be used in the Savage Model 99 hammerless lever action rifle. The name comes from its original manufacturer, Savage Arms, and the fact that the original load achieved 3,000 feet per second velocity with an 87 grain bullet. 87 grains, nothing to sneeze at. Just scrolling down here. Parent case 30-06. That's pretty cool. I didn't know that. Now, me talking here. Not in this cartridge and not in this exact caliber, but in 243, which is a little bit smaller. .24 caliber versus 25 caliber. One of my favorite loads for deer, an old hand load of mine. I'm not going to give you exact data, but an 85 grain Sierra Game King over Varget in a 243 is just a deer dropper of a round. It performs swimmingly in deer size game. Now the bullet technology may not have been there in 1915, but as soon as they got, soft point, decent hunting bullets, especially by the time the core lock rolled around, there's no reason this is not a fantastic deer cartridge also. That 87 grain at 3,000, it's not a 243 in power, but I would not hesitate to use it on deer size game. Let's look at some of the other loadings listed on the wiki. 75 grain at 3170, a 90 grain at 2997, a 100 grain at 2864, and 117 grain at 2654. And that certainly would be a decent, say, larger deer size game. Now the more popular today 25 is the 25-06, both based on the 30-06, but this one's a little bit smaller, a little bit neck down. It's not equal to a 25-06, but it's, again, certainly powerful enough, in my opinion, for deer and deer size game. 20th century, like the firearms aficionados that wanted this kind of, for the time, very high performing hot rod cartridge, I would assume this has taken a ton of deer. Literally over a ton, and figuratively. To give credit, also, Charles Newton designed the 250 3000 Savage. Next, we're going to go to the 303 Savage. I believe this is the oldest of the cartridges we're going to talk about today by Savage. Now, when you hear 303 today, you might think 303 Brit. Assume it was a pretty popular cartridge back then, so it got its name via that, but it really has nothing to do with the 303 British cartridge. And I know almost nothing about this cartridge, so we're going to go to the Wikipedia pretty early. The 303 Savage is a rimmed 30 caliber rifle cartridge developed by Savage Arms Company in 1894. 1894. Did I say ahead of its time on some other cartridges? This one, ahead of its time. Why? Because if you're familiar, Winchester has an 1894. Very, very, very famous cartridge, or very, very famous, rather, rifle/carbine, the 1894. Iconic, Western. When you think like Western, you're probably thinking of a 94. You're probably not thinking of a Savage 99. I guess it doesn't look as cool. Savage 99s are kind of futuristic even for today. Right, and they're well over 100 years old. Kind of got this steampunk kind of sleek but classic aesthetic. I couldn't picture, you probably don't picture John Wayne rocking one in McClintock, whatever, I don't know what year that took place, but you get the idea. It doesn't look like your traditional lever action, because it wasn't. Again, it was ahead of its time. This came out 1894, this cartridge, and pretty soon after, chambered in the model 1899, was not like many of the other, pretty much all the other that I'm aware of, lever action cartridges, where it was kind of black powder and designed for round bullets, even if they later were loaded with smokeless powder. They had to use a round bullet or a round nose bullet because they were loaded in a tubular magazine. Again, the Savage 99 does not suffer that handicap. That was me interjecting. Let's get back to what this says. 1894, which was designed as a short as the 30-30 Winchester action cartridge for the Savage model 1895 and later the 1899 hammerless lever action rifle. The cartridge was designed for smokeless powder and at a time when black powder cartridges were still popular. The 303 Savage round was ballistically superior to the 30-30, but only marginally. This says that the cartridge remained popular through the 1930s. It says various loads, 190 grain load was used on such animals as deer and moose. Now let us look here at this, what they have here. And the 303, I do believe, has a point. To clarify, the 303 British has a 3.12, I believe, diameter bullet. This is named the 303. It does not. It has a regular American .308 diameter bullet. Just to clarify that. But it lists a 170 grain at 1649 foot-pounds. I would classify this as an intermediate cartridge. Again, as I mentioned in the article, very similar to a 30-30. 30-30 is, I would consider a decent intermediate cartridge. Maybe America's first intermediate cartridge. This one was right behind it. A decent intermediate cartridge with the benefit of Spitzer bullets. It's not a full-powered rifle cartridge. If you look at that, you're looking at 2,000 feet a second. It's quite a bit slower than what I would consider full-powered rifle rounds, like a 308, 30-06. But certainly, let's say inside 250 yards, with depending on how decent the bullets were then and what it was loaded with. A decent deer, and even quite a bit larger than deer at 250 yards. It's a good cartridge, but not good enough for it to last long. In fact, Savage itself replaced the cartridge pretty soon with the last cartridge we're going to talk about, the 300 Savage. Now, from what I know about the 300 Savage, it is basically a 308. A little bit less than here or there, a little bit less modern, but it's much older. But basically, if you think of the class, now it's not exact, it's a little bit less powerful, but you're splitting hairs. Anything the 308 can do, the 300 Savage can do, and was doing it earlier. Doesn't mean it's just as good a cartridge. That doesn't mean you should get a machine gun chambered in it instead of the 308, right? Doesn't mean that at all. But you think about whatever you're hunting, if you'd hunt it with a 308, you could hunt it with a 300 Savage in a similar load. The 300 Savage, this is from the wiki, is a rimless. So we moved from rim to rimless. You'll notice a lot of the early metallic cartridges were rimmed to help with extraction, just the metallurgy, the brass cases. But once they pretty much got that worked out, you see a lot of move towards rimless cartridges. This cartridge is no different. A rimless, meaning the rim doesn't stick out any farther than the case body. 30 caliber rifle cartridge developed by Savage Arms Company in 1920. Now think about this. This is a kind of a shorter, I'll get to the power later, but I would call it a full powered, again comparing it to the 308, full powered, shorter, kind of short action 30 caliber round, full powered rifle cartridge in 1920. The military / Winchester did not do this with the 308 until the 1950s, early to mid 1950s. So 1920, a lot happened between 1920 and 1950. I don't think I have to tell you that. But pretty crazy how much older this cartridge is, at least as far as firearms development history goes. To replace the 303 Savage, popular Savage Model 99 hammerless lever action rifle, which was started to produce again as the Model 99, as well as the Savage Model 1920 bolt action rifle. So we see Savage here. They're kind of known today for their bolt action rifle. I don't know if this was their first one, but here, their Savage Model 1920 bolt action rifle, despite having a short case in order to fit the original Model 99 magazine and a rather stumpy neck. The cartridge is capable of producing 150 grain bullets at over 26,000 feet per second. Now, if we think about, I generally remember 308 as 150 grain at 2,800 feet a second. Now that varies based on, weather conditions, altitude, barrel length, even tiny things like different kind of rifling. But in general numbers, 308, 150, 2,800. This is 150 at 2,600. That's pretty close, right? That's pretty close for 1920. And probably could do better today if your gun can handle it with better powders, because just like the original 30-06, our modern 30-06 is quite a bit faster. I imagine this with modern powders should be quite a bit faster, even keeping it in safe pressures. So again, it's a full-powered rifle cartridge, and if you really know, like 308, if you've held enough 308 in your hand, if you held this in your hand, you'd be like, yeah, it's not a 308, but it looks pretty close. And again, far predates it. And this lists here 150 grain at 2630 Remington core lock, and it lists a 150 grain Hornady Super Performance at 2740. So again, more modern loading, like we talked about. This lists 180 grain Federal Soft Point Factory at 2350. Just has a couple of hand loads, but it's a full powered rifle round, and it's a full powered rifle round. That again, is it as powerful as a 308? No, but anything that I would hunt with a 308, I wouldn't be like, well, I do it with a 308, but the 300 Savage, it's a pea shooter. It's in the ballpark. It's probably even the same league, the same game, same AA, AAA kind of status, right? It's close. Now, I mentioned that these rounds were ahead of their time. We're not in that time. I think they're quite a bit dated today. Now, there's only a few reasons I could think of using these today. The big one is tradition, especially family tradition, right? If you have one of these rifles, like a Savage 99, passed down from generation to generation, still in good shape, is still shootable. Is the Savage 99 modern by today's standards? No. But it's still a good rifle. You can still hunt deer with it. You can still hunt the appropriate game for the appropriate cartridge with it. So family tradition, right? If this was a hand-me-down gun, and you should be proud of that, and you should use it. The other one is you're a collector and you just want something different, right? Again, I said these had their own aesthetic. Steampunk, antique, modern. Whatever. I don't know what it would be called if it was, an aesthetic. But it's very, very unique. So you just want a lever action, or you want something different from the early to mid 20th century, they're good rifles. Does it make practical sense when you could go out and get a new Savage, a Savage Axis for $400, and a 308, and a 30-06, and a 6.5 Creedmoor? No, but that doesn't make them a bad rifle. So those are two reasons. One is you just see a really sweet deal on one at a flea market, not a flea market, I probably don't sell guns at flea markets, but at like an estate sale or a garage sale or a local gun store that just, these things aren't highly coveted like a pre-64 Winchester generally are. Now they might be if it's some kind of collector thing in an uber rare caliber. They came in a ton of calibers, not just the ones we talked about today, but in general, these aren't crazy coveted guns. They're not like a pre-64 Winchester Model 70 in general. But they are good guns. So if you get a good deal on one, right, let's be real, you're hunting white-tailed deer out of a deer stand on the East Coast inside of 200 yards. It's not really so much about the rifle in that case as much as we might want to pretend that it is. I grew up hunting that way. It's more about just being in the stand at the right time, right? You sitting in the stand, you're paying attention. That's probably the way bigger factor there. You want to do a retro hunt, get your LL Bean boots, get you a red and black plaid shirt and a Jones hat or a trapper hat. Hey, some people love the hunting as much for the tradition as they do for the meat. Nothing wrong with that. These are good cartridges. They're cool cartridges, and I thought were worth doing an episode on the Savage cartridges. I don't want to misrepresent them, pretend they're something that they're not. They were very much ahead of their time. They're dated today. They're inefficient today. They're not ineffective today. Just like a lot of people hunt with a 30-30. A lot of people hunt with a 45-70. Right? Just because they're dated and inefficient doesn't make them ineffective. So I thought I would just kind of do an episode on the Savage cartridges. I think this is all of them. I could be wrong. All that I was aware of or could find in brief research. I appreciate you guys. I appreciate all that you do. Thank you for listening, and have a blessed day.